A video stream of today's show right now at 560theanswer.com.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Yesterday, President Trump made the call to ground Boeing 737 MAX 8s. Apparently thought the FAA was not moving with the alacrity it needed to, so he stepped in. Yeah. Did he make the right call?
We're going to be issuing an emergency order of prohibition to ground all flights of the 737 MAX 8 and the 737 MAX 9 and planes associated with that line. Any plane currently in the air will go to its destination and thereafter be grounded until further notice.
Trying to resist the temptation to make airplane jokes here because of the tragedy with the Ethiopian air crash and the Lion Air crash in Indonesia prior to, and the discussion about this cockpit software system that includes an anti-stalling feature that is the point of some controversy. Yet it is worth noting, despite the hue and cry, you had dozens of 737 MAX 8s that were in operation without incident being flown by pilots from both American and Southwest Airlines. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by an expert in this space. He is Robert Mark, senior editor at Flying Magazine and publisher of Jet Whine. That's WHINE, jetwine.com. Robert, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Dan.
So did Trump make the right call?
Well, I'll tell you, if you're an airline passenger, I think people will say he absolutely did, because it certainly puts their mind at ease. And that was really where I think a lot of the pressure was coming from. Mm-hmm. People just said, look, we don't feel safe in this thing. And they wanted someone to tell them that it was safe. And we never got to that point. So here we are with all these airplanes sitting on the ground. Well,
so the question is there any reason to believe that the 737 MAX 8s are not safe based on the evidence that we have?
Well, we don't have much evidence, to be honest. We know essentially that the electronic system you mentioned for stalling, which is essentially, it's not the engine, it's the wing that stops flying. That's our definition of a stall.
Right.
And the airplane senses that and says, oh, I'm going to push the nose down, pitch the nose down of the airplane and get it back flying. And it kind of got out of the hands of the pilots. And now they've seen some similarities between this most recent accident and the one in Indonesia. But right now, that's all we know. And that's not very much. But again, the rest of the world said, we're not taking any chances.
So what happens next? They ground what? I know Southwest has 34 of them. American Airlines has 24. United has a 737 MAX 9. Has that been grounded too?
Well, it has, in fact.
Okay. So then what do they? We're just waiting. I know the black box was taken to France.
Right. And one of the black boxes was damaged in the accident. And right now they've said they sent the boxes to someplace in Europe to be analyzed, and we're just going to have to sit back and wait for them to get some data that gives them a better indication of what brought these airplanes down. And we don't know. It may be something completely different that initially looked similar to the Indonesian accident, but it may be something completely different.
Well, I mean, we don't have time to be measured in this thing. We have to go wherever the hysteria goes.
Both of them were fairly new aircraft, and both of them did the same thing within 6 minutes of taking off. It appeared to nosedive down, up and down, and then crash. Correct? Unless there's something else that happened that I don't know about.
And that was what was enough to give people a concern. I think if the airplane had been flying longer, or maybe the sequences had happened in a greater time frame, maybe people wouldn't have panicked quite so much. But that is what it is.
And there are other reasons that that could explain those similarities, where the cause was different in each case. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, similarity doesn't prove anything. It just gives you an initial indication. And again, when we get those boxes, we may find something, again, completely different that brought the airplane down. It could be something related to pilot error that had something to do with it. We just don't know.
And the anti-stall feature on the cockpit software, that's something that pilots are trained on and can be overridden?
Well, that's a interesting point. When Boeing brought out the MAX 8 and MAX 9, they didn't tell the pilots that this new piece of software had been added because they thought it was so simple that it was impossible for a pilot to misdiagnose this. And pilots that I know, myself included, don't think like that. We can handle a lot of situations, but just tell us what the airplane's going to do. Mm-hmm. Tell us what you put in it so that we know exactly what we're facing. And they didn't do that before the Indonesian crash, and we've still been waiting for this fix that supposedly is coming based on the Indonesian crash from Boeing. And here we are 5 or 6 months later, and it's about to debut, they said, next month.
Well, wait, what's the fix?
Well, it's a software fix that Boeing's going to release to prevent the airplane from getting a false cue, and that's what we think happened in the Indonesian crash. Is that the wing really wasn't about to stop flying? Somehow, one of the sensors told the computer it was, and the computer said, "Okay, I'll do what you told me to do," and it just took the controls right out of the hands of the autopilot that was flying and pushed the nose over. And then the pilots instinctively tried to pull the wheel back to regain control, and they just were not able to do it.
Holman Jenkins has a piece in the Wall Street Journal on the topic, and he references a point that was made by a chief pilot for British Airways more than 10 years ago, warning about the de-skilling of pilots, their inevitable replacement by computers. And the point that Jenkins makes, based on the comment this chief pilot made, airline crashes should become rarer as automation has become more prevalent, but those accidents that do occur seem increasingly to consist of cockpit systems and crews working together to fly perfectly flyable planes into the ground.
I would agree with that. I do. I mean, and I think we only need to look at our automobiles for people to understand what we're dealing with. I mean, there's so much automation in a car now that people can easily be distracted when a car is able to steer itself without, you see people letting go of the wheel and they go, wow, this is pretty neat. And it is cool the first couple of times, but eventually what happens is that your mind says, well, the car's driving along here pretty well. I can kind of look at something else right now. And then when something fails, they go, whoa, what happened? They're just completely, because they're out of the loop. And that's what happens sometimes on airplanes as well.
I wanted to go back to something you said about the flight manual. And Politico interviewed one pilot who said it's almost criminally insufficient that they weren't, that Boeing left out all systems in the manuals and what they should do in certain situations. Do you agree with that?
I don't know what's criminally insufficient. It's a hard thing to define. Did it make me mad? Oh, it made me really mad, and it does every other pilot. As I said earlier, we can deal with a lot of situations, but just tell us the truth. Don't treat us like we're kids and say, well, this is so perfect, you don't even need to know it exists. And that's a pretty arrogant attitude, I think, on anybody's part.
Why hasn't that issue been raised to this point by all those pilots at American and Southwest flying these planes?
Well, because now we know, anecdotally, what we think the problem is and how to react to it. And so I think every crew that takes off now, we do a briefing before takeoff of, if this happens, if that happens, and all the crews in the MAX 8s have been doing the same thing and saying, and if this thing starts to pitch down on us, here's what we're going to do, and they can reach over and turn off these two electrical switches just below the throttles and disarm that system. So they're ready for it, and they weren't ready for it before. and that's the difference.
They weren't ready for it before, but are there any known incidents on American or Southwest flights of this nature?
Well, there have been some incidents that have been reported that are somewhat similar, but we can't pin it down and say it's exactly the same as the Indonesian accident because the data just isn't sufficient. But as you said earlier, there are, I forgot, almost 400 of these airplanes flying around the world since they were introduced in 2017, I believe. And there haven't been any serious incidents that I know of. But again, that it only takes one or two.
Yeah,
in
and
this
that
case.
same Politico article, another pilot that was interviewed said he had a problem with the MAX 8 back in October with the auto throttle, and he said that he had to quickly adjust the thrust manually to continue to climb because it was fighting him.
Well, and again, to what we spoke about earlier with these automated systems, the crash of the aircraft at San Francisco some years ago, where they landed short and hit the dike and scattered the airplane all over the runway.
Right.
The pilots thought the autopilot and the auto throttle, which adjusts the power, was going to do one thing, and they missed one tiny clue that needed to put that in place, and the auto throttles just didn't function. And they said, "Wow, look at that! Boy, we're getting really slow and low," and they never touched the throttles themselves, and because they said, "Well, the computer's going to do it. We have faith in the computer," and that is again going back to that problem of too much automation dependency. We've got to be able to tell. We've got to be able to see that something's not working right, and we need to take the airplane back from the computer.
Something has been made of the Ethiopian pilot, about 200 hours of flying time, apparently, that's been reported. And obviously that's a lot less than, say, the flying time that pilots for Southwest or American have. Could that have been a factor into just a lack of experience?
Well, in Europe, they have a different licensing system than we have here in the States. And, low-time pilots in the first officer, the right seat, are not that unusual. But most of the time when they get to that position, most of their training has been done in a simulator, not in a real airplane.
Right.
And to me, when you get a situation like what happened in Ethiopia, that captain was pretty much on his own. I mean, that new person would have been so new and so overwhelmed so quickly that they were just useless to the guy. That's the problem that you have with brand new co-pilots. Again, they're supposed to be there to help, and if they don't have any experience, there ain't not much help.
On the training piece of it, just walk us through that a little bit for commercial pilots. So getting my private pilot's license, I know this is apples and oranges, but I'm just trying to make an analogy. We've got GPS now these days, but not allowed to use GPS for the purpose of preparing for the check ride. You got to be able to pilotage your way around a particular the chart for a particular path for your flight plan. And I wonder, are commercial pilots trained similarly, where you've got to know the systems, the automation piece of it, but you're also trained manually with the idea that systems can fail?
Well, that's another problem we faced, is that over the last 10 years, the amount of what we call hand flying without the autopilot, has decreased at most airlines, because I can remember in my early days of automation, people would say, put the autopilot on. It flies better than you do. Mm-hmm. It's smoother. It gives the people in the back a better ride. And so we're kind of forced into flying on automation. But then, too, some of the new air traffic control procedures that have been put together based on the satellite GPS system are so complex that a human couldn't fly them without the computer anyway.
Right.
So it's almost kind of a rock and a hard spot kind of situation.
So what happens now? I mean, spring break starts next week for a lot of suburban kids on Chicago's spring break. If you have 34 planes out of commission on Southwest, 24 out of American, is that going to be a big deal?
Well, it's going to cause some delays. There's no doubt about that. I mean, people are going to have to they're just going to have to be ready for it. I mean, you can't have it both ways. You can't have the public, clamoring for safety and then take airplanes off the fleet and not have some delays somewhere along the line.
You're clearly not. You're clearly not familiar with. You're clearly not familiar with the American public. If you don't think people will demand it both ways.
Well, that's true. Yes, you're right.
Well, what is American do? Going to bring back the Super 80?
Yeah, well,
if you're tall,
they're probably thinking about that right now.
Yeah, they're going to have to do something.
It probably take them so long to get the things up and running again that. But see, again, that's another problem that this is causing is that we have no idea after this grounding yesterday how long these airplanes are going to be out. We just don't, because we don't even know what we're dealing with yet. So, and then whatever it is, then they've got to find a fix for it if it's not this software patch that Boeing is already bringing out. And we just don't know that it's the same.
And it's not to be cavalier at all about airline safety, but it is always nice to interject some context in these conversations, particularly when hysteria is ruling the day. The number of people killed on a commercial flight in America last year, I think it was a round number, right? 0?
Correct.
So there's no jeopardy that airline safety is going to stop being the safest mode of transportation by a wide measure, is there?
No, I don't think so. And let's be serious, too. These two accidents did not happen in the United States. They happened on non-U.S. carriers in, what to Americans, Indonesia and Africa seem like rather remote locations. And, but, again, so is that because of the airplanes? We don't know. Was it because of the training of the pilots? We don't know. And there's just so many questions to which we don't have any answers that I think that's where this panic kind of set in.
He is Robert Mark. He's the senior editor at Flying Magazine and the publisher of Jet Whine. That's WHINE, jetwine.com. Robert, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys.
Take care.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
What kind of plane is it?
Oh, it's a big, pretty white plane with red stripes and curtains in the window and wheels, and it looks like a big Tylenol.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer.